Hello everyone and welcome back to Anomalous Archive, where we post scary stories to help you sleep. Please comment where you are listening to my videos from, since I believe it would be fun for all of us to know. Also, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for helping me reach to 50 subscribers. Let's reach 100 subscribers before the end of January. So sit back, relax and enjoy. From the sky, cold patterns of the first November snow began to fall, and Curtis was completely chilled. His jaw throbbed after 3 missed punches. The guy from the football cage had struck hard and surely. Blood from Curtis's nose ran over his lips and chin, refusing to stop. Curtis tightened his soiled scarf, pulled up the collar of his grimy coat, and quickened his pace. "Got yourself beat up, Curtis?" asked Uncle Alex near the entrance, smoking. He was the neighbor from the apartment below. "You've been hanging out at that cage again?" The boy didn't answer and silently dashed into the open doorway. By the elevator on the first floor stood cranky Grandma Tony from the 9th floor, holding 2 bags. "Hey, kid," she scolded. "Are you the one stomping above my head? I'll tell your mother everything. Why are you climbing up to the attic? Probably stomping around and smoking there." "I didn't climb anywhere. I have no friends," Curtis mumbled quietly, and without waiting for a jab, he bolted upstairs. On the 7th floor, his mother had already opened the door. "Look at you. My goodness, what trouble you are. Get into the bathroom and tilt your head back." "I can't," Curtis protested as he untied his boots. "I'll choke." He pulled off his scarf and coat, pinched his nose with thin fingers, and stepped from the hallway into the bathroom. His mom hurried after him. "How can I leave you here alone?" lamented Sonia. "They'll kill you." Curtis was washing up, not answering. She kept pressing. "Who did this to you? Somebody from the yard? Or that cage of yours? Or school? I'll call your homeroom teacher today." "Don't, Mom," Curtis whispered, drying his face with a towel. "I'll be home this weekend. I won't go anywhere." "We'll see about that," she warned, waving a finger and leaving for the bandage. Curtis washed his hands and walked to his room. He lay down on his couch and took his phone out of his pocket. A shiny crack stretched from the top corner of the screen. This time he was lucky, only the protective glass was damaged. His mom came in with 2 small white bundles and handed them to Curtis. "Put these in your nostrils. Are you going to eat dinner?" Curtis lazily shook his head and turned to the wall. "I'll eat tomorrow. I'm too tired." His mom sighed heavily and patted his back. "All right, sleep well. I'll pack you breakfast and leave it on the table. There's soup for 2 days, plus potatoes in the fridge. I'll come back Monday morning. At least call me, okay?" "Hey, Curtis, maybe I should give you a pill?" Her son didn't answer. He was already too far gone to make out her words. The pain in his jaw subsided, his body grew heavy, and he fell quickly into sleep. He dreamed of a school he didn't like. Yet, for some reason, all the staircases were destroyed. Curtis roamed the corridors, sensing with the back of his head that someone was behind him. But whenever he stopped and turned, the pursuer vanished around the nearest corner, and the boy had time only to notice a bald head and horrifying eyes. Suddenly, his mother shoved him. "Take these jars of preserves to Grandma Tony, now," she rattled. "I don't have time for anything." Curtis reluctantly got to his feet, still sore from yesterday's unfair beating, slipped on his slippers, and stepped into the hallway. He went up 2 flights of stairs before realizing he'd forgotten the jars. Right then, he heard the elevator on his floor open. "Did you deliver them?" his mom asked loudly. "Delivered," came a reply, just as loud, but in Curtis's voice. "Mom," she screamed. Someone who arrived by elevator gave a raspy laugh, and the apartment door slammed. The echo reverberated through the entire stairwell. Terrified, Curtis bent over as though his stomach had been slashed. An unbearable fiery pain ran from his navel to his neck. He wanted to rush to help, but couldn't take even a single step. His mother kept screaming, and not even the closed door could stifle her dying wails. Curtis clenched his teeth, collapsed onto his back, and in an instant found himself awake in bed. Lying there in cold sweat, unable to move, he stared at the hideous face glaring down at him from the ceiling. Sleep paralysis, he guessed. He heard his classmates talking about it not long ago, a freaky, frightening state in which the body wakes up while the mind is still asleep, and if you open your eyes then. Curtis clung to that thought like a lifeline. As long as it stayed in his head, he felt no fear. It's just a dream, he soothed himself. A simple hallucination, nothing more. But for a second, the reassuring notion slipped away, and the monster on the ceiling seemed to sniff out his sweet horror. Its face stretched lower, tracing a semicircle as it opened a huge dark maw. Warm blood dripped from its terrifying eyes down onto Curtis. Out of the shadows came pale, gaunt shoulders. He counted 4 of them, and he was sure there were lower limbs, too, hidden from view. It was a lanky, spider-like beast. The creature crawled aside and out of Curtis's line of sight. A wind roared in his ears, and it became hard to breathe. He tried desperately to scream for help, anything so his mother would hear and come running. The icy fear froze inside his chest. The creature was somewhere nearby, maybe just an inch from his pillow. That's not the wind, Curtis realized, trembling. That's it breathing. His vision darkened. He jerked and then woke up. The bandage bundles fell out of his nostrils, and fresh blood stained the pillowcase. His head was pounding, his jaw felt rotten, his eyes throbbed with pain, and the back of his skull had gone numb, pulsing with prickly spasms. Curtis made his way to the kitchen, put the kettle on, swallowed 2 painkillers, and stared out the window. The sight of a gray sky and a street cloaked in fog made him feel downcast. He was all alone in the apartment. His mom had left early that morning. Pouring himself some coffee with milk, he returned to his room and checked his phone. He saw one unheard voice message from his friend Paul. "So anyway, I'm on your side. I asked Tony, then I asked Cirque, found out from him that it was Alex's brother who roughed you up. He's here for the weekend because he came along with his mom for a visit, and Monday they're leaving. Cirque told me to let you know to stay home. This psycho is gonna look for you." Can you believe it? Yesterday he tossed Max over his shoulder when they tried to break up the fight. The guy's nuts. Curtis grimaced. His weekend plans were now pretty clear. He tried calling his mom, but she was out of service again. No surprise, cell reception was always terrible in her part of the countryside near Millfield. "Mom," he said aloud to the empty apartment. He always found it reassuring to double-check that she truly wasn't there before grabbing his stash from behind the desk. In a box once meant for ballpoint pens, wrapped in a plastic bag, Curtis kept his cigarettes. He had to smoke carefully, sitting on the balcony with the window half open. The moment he flicked the lighter, he heard neighbor Uncle Alex talking downstairs. Unlike Curtis, he practically leaned out over the railing, puffing on his cheap tobacco. Sometimes he'd call his wife at work to give updates on how his day was going. "Gail, I just woke up," he muttered. "Hold on, don't yell. Yeah. I had a dream, too, about some bald." "What?" "You never listen." "I said it was in my face." "I don't know. Why are you asking?" "Some freaky spider creeping on our ceiling. Breathing in my ear." "Must be the weather. Yeah, I get it." Curtis froze. He suddenly didn't feel like smoking anymore. He tucked the cigarette behind his ear, shut the window, and hurried into the warm room. That afternoon, he chatted with friends in their group text, telling them about the dream and about his neighbor. His buddies sent back their own stories of sleep paralysis. One girl had a similar episode once, where something enormous clung to the ceiling, only it was red with big eyes. All that chatter made Curtis feel a bit braver. Even the strange coincidence with Uncle Alex's story no longer felt so bizarre. When night fell, Curtis heated some dinner and sat down at his laptop. Around 11, his classmate Helen wrote, asking if he'd seen the new horror story on YouTube. She liked to discuss new releases with him, and they had become friends at the start of the school year because of those stories. "No, Helen, I haven't," he answered. "I'll watch it tonight. Usually, I fall asleep to them." "I do my homework to them," she replied, sending a smiley. "All right, Curtis, talk tomorrow. Maybe we'll hang out." She went offline. He clenched his teeth in frustration. The fight had ruined any chance of them meeting up. Curtis switched off the lights to set the mood, wrapped himself in a blanket, put in his earbuds, and started the first story. It was about a creepy form and a monster with a sack of human hair. Curtis couldn't find a comfortable position on his side, his earbud pressed into the pillow, so he lay on his back, scanning the comments. Everyone joked about some demon that people gazed into the eyes of. A few followers praised the plot and asked if it was true. Curtis grimaced, scoffing, "Nonsense you're writing. There are no such monsters. This is made up, and the hero's acting dumb half the story." Then he leaned back on the pillow, shut his eyes, and tried to listen again. The narrator's voice grew fainter, the words drowned in his drifting sleep. He woke suddenly. Another horror tale had begun in his earbuds. Someone was whispering "Sasha, Sasha" in a creepy voice. Curtis set his phone on the nightstand, flipped his damp pillow, and briefly opened his eyes. Part of the corridor wall glowed with a pale yellow patch of light. The bathroom light must be on. That happens sometimes. He covered himself up and yelled, "Mom, close the door." Then his voice trailed off in his dry throat. Curtis pulled his knees up, a chill stabbed at his stomach. He scooted closer to the wall, hiding under the blanket up to his nose, eyes fixed on the doorway. He distinctly remembered shutting off every light. He was sure of it. The digital clock on his bedside table showed 1:30 a.m. The apartment was silent, the neighbors quiet, and from the slightly open window, only the smell of wet asphalt drifted in from the dark, empty street. A draft touched his damp hair, sending goosebumps down his shoulders. Suddenly, the corridor switch clicked. The patch of light vanished. Darkness swallowed everything. No shapes remained, only the clock's faint blue digits hanging in the blackness. Then Curtis heard footsteps coming from the bathroom. A short tap on the linoleum, like a high heel, once each second, step by step. They reached his bedroom door, and the carpet muffled the sound, making it sickeningly soft. Curtis lay rigid, staring at the clock. The blue numbers disappeared for a second as if someone passed in front of them. Then, those rhythmic taps seemed to migrate onto the wall insulated with foam board. Some unthinkable limbs were puncturing the wallpaper, reaching for the ceiling. Gradually, his eyes made out a moving form, a dark mass in the center, like a core, and thin extensions resembling giant spider legs. When it got to the top, it flipped over with a nauseating squelch, and Curtis recognized that same horrifying face he'd seen during his sleep paralysis. His thoughts spun. He was frozen stiff, not even trembling, though he was tense to the breaking point. Is this a dream or not? He wondered. Sweat beaded on his forehead, salty droplets stinging his eyes and trickling down his nose. Or is it still paralysis? The real terror seized him. If this was real, then that thing last night was real, too. The creature skittered past the ceiling light and hovered above the couch, letting out a low, raspy moan. Curtis couldn't see it directly. He was lying on his side, too afraid to move. "Dear God," he prayed silently, "don't let it figure out I'm awake." The monster moaned again, as if to taunt him, letting him know it was fully aware. Tears welled in Curtis's eyes, blending with sweat and soaking his lashes. It was growing hotter under the blanket, but the goosebumps never left his skin. His breathing quickened, his pulse hammered, and the fear crashed over him again. He had to give no sign he was awake, it might hear. His jaw ached, each spike of pain pounding in sync with his racing heartbeat. A ringing in his ears mingled with the creature's drawn-out wheezing. "Why isn't it jumping at me? Why is it waiting?" he thought. Then something dripped onto his pillow. Again. And again. Onto the blanket, onto his hair, and finally onto his cheek. Tiny puddles formed near his temple and trickled across his eyelids until they reached his lips. Blood, the petrified boy realized, biting his tongue so he wouldn't scream. Time on the clock seemed frozen. He felt an hour pass, but in reality, barely 2 minutes had gone by. The back of his head was numb, prickling as though covered by a tight cap of needles. The blue digits blurred in the darkness. The monster's moan grew into a shriek. Curtis couldn't cling to a single coherent thought. They scattered the moment he tried to focus. Then the clock's numbers vanished, the hideous sound ceased, and he was left in emptiness. His phone, left on the nightstand, vibrated. Mom was calling. Curtis lurched on the couch, drenched in sweat. He gasped for air with cracked lips, unable to breathe deeply enough. His mom hung up before he could answer. He waited a couple of minutes to compose himself, then tried calling her back, but again, she was unreachable. Furious, he threw his phone onto the couch and stomped to the kitchen. "What is going on?" he muttered into the second sleepless night. He drank some tea and remembered hearing Grandma Tony talk about footsteps in the attic. The sun was already up, and in daylight, everything felt safer. Even so, the memory sent shivers through Curtis. He scurried back to his room and turned on some music on his laptop. The day dragged slowly. Every chore sparked frustration, and being alone in the apartment was unsettling. That horrible face and those spidery limbs kept creeping back into his thoughts. Washing his hair proved especially unnerving. He kept picturing that, the moment he shut his eyes, the nighttime fiend would slither out from under the bathtub and stare at him. But each time he opened his eyes, he saw his own pale reflection in the large mirror on the door, forced a tense smile to keep fear at bay, and kept showering. His friend Helen stayed offline all day. No one else in his chat group was active either, and his mom never called again. Curtis had no appetite, no thirst, couldn't sit or lie still for long, terrified something would appear behind him and grab him. By sunset, he stepped onto the balcony with his cigarettes. He lit up, and from below the apartment awning, he heard Grandma Tony complaining about something. Curtis couldn't catch most of it, but suddenly, her words came through loud and clear. "It crawls out of the attic." His hands went cold. His fingers trembled, and he dropped the half-smoked cigarette, which hit the metal trim and fell to the ground. He slammed the window shut and dashed back into the room. "This is nonsense," he told himself, pressing his back to the balcony door. Who could possibly crawl out from there? He shuddered, slapped his cheek, and muttered, "Idiot, you watch too many horror stories at night. It's your own fault." Resolutely, he decided to sleep with the light on. That night, he double-checked the front door, closed off the bathroom and kitchen, locked himself in his bedroom, turned on the desk lamp, and lay down. Sleep refused to come. Worries about his mom filled his head. She hadn't called all day. Outside, some car rumbled soothingly. Curtis scrolled through news on his phone, trying to rid himself of the haunting images. When the car finally drove off, leaving the street silent, he played music softly and closed his weary eyes. Immediately, he remembered his dream, his mother's screams, the stabbing pain in his gut, the horrifying apartment hallway where something arrived by elevator, speaking with a familiar voice. Suddenly came a strange ringing sound. Curtis gasped and opened his eyes. The sound was real, not from a half-sleep fantasy. Slowly, he reached for his phone, paused the music, and looked at the partly open window. Hanging there was the monster. Sheer horror pounced on him from above, pinning him helplessly to the bed. Fierce cold tendrils seemed to slither into his very soul, grinding away his last scrap of hope. In the desk lamp's dim glow, the creature's ghastly face gleamed with a dark orange tinge. It was grinning, twitching its spindly limbs, never taking its scorching stare off Curtis. The window, he realized, choking on a sob. Not the door. I forgot to lock the window. Why? Sensing his dread, the monster began to quake, rasping as it burst into the room. The lamp toppled from the table and shattered, and the beast darted under the couch with a loud hiss. Curtis froze like a glitch. A burst of boldness rose in him for a split second. He screamed, jumped onto the floor, and landed barefoot on a slimy, cold tendril like a giant earthworm. His courage vanished instantly. He went rigid with terror and sprinted into the hallway, snatching the key from the door. Once in the corridor, he shoved the key back into the lock from the outside and turned it. His heart pounded, mouth half open, teeth clenched. He stared in a daze at the key protruding from the door. Inside, he heard the thing tapping, then a disgusting shuffle over the rug, and finally it clawed at the door. Curtis smacked his thigh, realizing his phone was still on the nightstand. The coat with his apartment keys was also in that room's closet. He cursed the day he convinced his mom to cancel their unused landline. The windows, he thought, and dashed to the living room, then the kitchen, making sure everything was locked. He propped the balcony door with a mop handle, grabbed his mom's box of valerian, and ran into the bathroom. Bolting himself in, he swallowed 4 tablets and sat in there until morning, never closing his eyes. When his mom finally returned, he heard her voice and came out of hiding in a frantic state, stumbling over his words as he tried to explain everything. She stared at him, pale-faced, sitting down at the kitchen table with her hand covering her mouth, head shaking. I don't understand, honey. Did you drink something? That look in your eyes. She squinted, growing more suspicious. Tell me. Curtis wailed, I swear, Uncle Alex saw it, too. It hung over him. Grandma Tony said she hears something on the attic floor. You told me it could just be a dream, but I don't understand anymore. Curtis wiped away tears. My heart hurts, my head's spinning. I couldn't call or escape because everything was in that room. Mom, come on, I'm begging you. She hesitated a moment, then pulled a kitchen knife from a drawer and went to his room. Don't go. Curtis pleaded from the floor. Calm down, she snapped. Where was it? Under the couch? There's nothing here. She reappeared and slid the knife back into its drawer. Broken lamp. That's it. He stayed quiet, but in his mind, it all added up. It hadn't been a dream or sleep paralysis. That nightmare was real. He remembered the wall. Mom, come here. I'll show you. He led her to a spot by the partially open closet door. There, in plain sight, were dents in the insulation, torn wallpaper, crushed foam board. If only he'd opened the curtains, Curtis, his mother lamented. It's too dark to see anything. What is this? She ran 2 fingers over the holes. Meanwhile, he realized something else. Why hadn't he noticed these before? And why was the closet door open? A crash sounded from the living room. His mother turned, bolting toward the noise before Curtis could grab her arm. His feet were glued to the floor. She vanished around the corner. He heard her footsteps stop in the next room, then her blood-curdling scream ripped through the entire apartment. It was exactly like in his nightmare, harrowing, hopeless, filled with torment. Neighbors banged on the pipes. Things crashed in the hallway. The creature was tormenting the unlucky woman, throwing her about, strangling her with its pale limbs, slamming her head against walls and floors. Blood splattered everywhere, leaving her face unrecognizable, just a crimson pulp beneath her sodden hair. The monster coiled around her torso and tore her apart in one savage pull, tossing her severed head into the air and neatly catching it with its cavernous black maw. It seemed bottomless. Curtis retched, backing away, whimpering like a beaten puppy cornered by a wolf. Without turning, the creature devoured his mother's arms, dropped them into its dark gullet, consumed her legs with protruding bone ends, then ripped open her torso in 2 bites. Its limbs gripped the doorframe, dozens of slimy fingers with yellow claws scratched the wood. Its head rose a yard off the floor, blocking the entrance. Curtis stumbled into the windowsill, the cold November wind blasting his back. He pinched his own arm. The pain was real. He couldn't possibly be dreaming. The beast glared, savoring the boy's despair, not rushing to finish him off. Curtis trembled, climbing onto the windowsill. Wind howled in his ears as the monster sprang forward. Its mouth became a gaping void, from which a familiar howl emerged. Curtis glanced down at the yard below. Best case, he'd catch a branch of the old birch tree, breaking his fall. Worst case, he'd smash into the metal fencing and leave half his skull on those bare shrubs. He turned to face the room and found himself nose to nose with the hideous face. The monster was right there. Within that black maw lay the dismembered body of his mother, beside Uncle Alex's bitten-off head. Curtis drew a final ragged breath and pushed off, flinging himself out the open window. A blow struck his jaw. Then another, powerful, cowardly hits. Something crunched in his nose. The first November snow rattled down like tiny white grains. Curtis shivered. He hits hard, he thought, tightening his scarf. No one was outside the building, but inside, by the elevator, stood Grandma Tony. "Are you the one stomping around above me? Why are you sneaking up to the attic?" Curtis brushed her off and sprinted upstairs. His mom met him at the door, and everything happened exactly the same way once more. His dying mind, like a broken record, replayed the final memories again and again, each loop eroding more details. Only the jump and his last thought remained clear, how he desperately did not want to die. Curtis perished on the frozen ground, bones shattered, with zero chance of survival. Snow kept falling onto his bloody face. Neighbors and passers-by shouted, dogs barked, and an ambulance siren wailed, but the boy heard nothing. Over and over, he hurried home from that cursed football cage and relived the 2 most horrifying nights of his short life. Each time the loop grew shorter and emptier, details vanishing, the cycle of his agonizing demise speeding up. Curtis's soul dissolved into eternity.